Here we are. Sweet. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Coin a Geek, the Coin a Geek podcast. This is Eliot. I am your host, joined as always by my friend and co-host, Mr. Daniel Schultz.
That's me.
Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning. Good morning.
Very good morning to you.
On a Saturday morning here, and we're live.
As you can tell from my background, not so much from Daniel's because it's the same.
Yeah,
we are doing this at a different time. As we are kind of trying to get back into the swing of things here, we're figuring out what time works best, what day works best, being that we're both married men with children, married with children. Things are more difficult these days, at least for me, probably not for Daniel. So Daniel has historically been a morning person. I have historically not been, but True. I am actually shifting more towards a morning person.
What's funny is you're probably more awake right now than myself, because I made the mistake of staying up late last night playing Crusader Kings 3. One more turn. One more thing. After this, I'll go to bed.
Oh no,
not happen.
Yep. That was my problem when I tried Civilization out. Well, that's funny, dude. Well, we'll talk about that in the games that we're playing. But yeah, man, I'm excited to be back here with you. We're just trying to get this show back up and running and get some kind of consistency. So hopefully, as we go forward, we'll have this eventually on an audio RSS feed that people can download. We also have some ideas for how we can further expand maybe the Coin a Geek network. I've actually talked to a couple people who are maybe interested in contributing to like a site or something like that and writing reviews. So very slowly but surely, we are getting this thing back in gear. So
yeah, going back to like what we really originally envisioned, it's been a break, and we've had some not false starts, but some contributions from ourselves, from some other people in the intermittent period. But
yeah,
we've never let it die. That's the thing.
Yeah, never let it die is exactly right. I love doing this. This is fun. And so last time, kind of as we've been, just for the audience sake, the few times we've done a show, it's been more topical. I picked something that was like, hey, we're going to focus on this specific topic. Kind of the old format that we used to have was we maybe spent a little more time just having some banter at the beginning, talking more personally about what we've been playing, what we've seen, maybe even giving like a short review. And then we pick a multitude of topics to go over and give opinions on. So while I still want to do some dedicated episodes to topics that would be fun, like Daniel and I have talked about, maybe going over, hey, here's our top 3 to 5 games of our childhood or of the 16-bit era. We'll do stuff like that, but that will be supplemental and I would like to continue to do weekly shows and just continue to catch up on whatever's happening. So with all that being said, thanks for tuning in if you are. So I'll kick it out to Daniel. You mentioned Crusaders 3. What are you playing? First of all, what is that game? Because
Crusader Kings 3. Yes. Crusader Kings 3 is a mixture between a strategy game and an RPG where you start as a noble in some portion of the world, and then you try to gain more land, or through conquest or marriage pacts and all kinds of things. And I had been waiting for a long time, because this game is not like brand new, but
sure,
I've played tons of it on the regular version. And recently, as in a few days ago, I found out that A Song of Ice and Fire mod came out for it. So Game of Thrones mod there. And so I've been playing that. But
that's awesome.
That is it's just part of it too. Like, it's not even the full thing yet. That it only has 2 start dates, and eventually, when the full mod is released, it's going to be like you can start basically any time, and Game of Thrones history, and you can do all this kind of crazy stuff. But it's a super fun game as it is, and then with that mod, it's kind of fun. and only going to get more fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm trying to figure out if I can add. Is there a way for me to have us on the screen, but also screen share like an image?
Yes. Go to present, and then present the image, and then we'll be on the side.
Oh, here we go. Screen share. Is it screen share or? Sorry, we're figuring this out as I go.
So I'll go on.
Okay.
It's got a lot of the characters, a lot of the secrets still happen depending on what you do. A lot of the plot points, the stories will continue to happen, but then it might be different. If you say choose to be Rhaegar Targaryen, you can win the Battle of the Trident, and then you can become the king. And how do things play out differently? And eventually, the game will be full game will be released, and you'll get the other places like the Essos nations, Bravos, and all those other nations. But right now, it's just Westeros, so you can't really do too much conquering as a king. You kind of have to start out as somebody small and try to build your power that way. But
I see.
Yeah,
dude, these games are always like super intimidating for me. I think that's definitely, I think, a big difference between you and I, where our gaming styles. I mean, it looks cool, but for me, I would be like, dude, it's like one of those. It's total like micromanager kind of game.
Right. It's actually, I know exactly what you're saying, and compared to something like Victoria or Europa Universalis or Hearts of Iron, this game is not in depth at all. It's almost like a baby game. But for people that don't like these kinds of games, they're not big on real-time strategy, because there's some real-time strategy elements. They're not big on simulation stuff, or but if you can get into it and you can play it, it's one of those games like Civilization, where it doesn't end. You can just keep going.
No, I mean, I think that's cool. I think it's just one of those things that I think Civilization is probably the closest I've ever come to that. Mm-hmm. And I surprised myself how much I actually enjoyed Civilization. But also games, this isn't the same kind of game at all, but it reminds me of the game, the RPG that you like a lot, the Divinity Original Sin. Like these games that require a lot of micromanagement and they give you like that freedom to really tweak stuff and make it your own. And in that way, it's almost like playing. It's almost in a weird way, kind of like playing a board game. I feel like like a Risk or something along those lines, where it's
this Risk is a good comparison for this. I've used that comparison in the past when people have asked me about Civilization. But this game's a lot like that, and it's kind of funny. You would be much more into, say, a Skyrim type of a game, I think, than me. But for me, I get bored of the traveling around the world doing all of these things in Skyrim. It's too big. I'd rather just play a really old-fashioned JRPG, or a Persona game where there's a clear linear storyline.
Interesting.
Or I want a game that's like ginormous and huge, and I'm not dealing with the minutia of individual walking around and killing enemies and everything, but rather dealing with it on a more macro scale, we'll say.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because my kind of feel about that has changed. I do like Skyrim, but I think the older I get, the more I appreciate getting through, being able to actually finish a game. So I'll actually, speaking of old school RPGs, before we get into our topics, I'll talk about what I'm playing. So
one more thing about CK3, Crusader Kings 3.
Oh yeah.
The mod scene is crazy. Like this Game of Thrones mod is as robust as a regular release game. Like if the company that in Paradox Interactive that made it had the license, I mean, this would be something they could sell as a DLC, full price game, let alone DLC. It's crazy. And there's other ones. There's a Warcraft mod that has all kinds of just basically like playing World of Warcraft as this game. And there's Stormlight Archive for Brandon Sanderson fans. There's Japan's not in the base game, but you can just be feudal Japan and do that. And man, there's so many mods for it. It's crazy. It's one of the most supported games out there because of how popular the format is.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, it's one of those things that maybe someday I'll take a crack at it and see if it's something that's for me. But I'm glad that you're enjoying it, and it sounds like at least in the realm of game it is that it's good. You mentioned about old school RPGs. I've been playing a game that is arguably an old school RPG style, the Octopath Traveler, the second one. Yeah. I finally beat it. I finally beat the main story. So if those of you guys who are not familiar with it, Octopath Traveler, this is the sequel I'm talking about, the second one. When the first one came out, it's got this kind of like hybrid of pixel art in 3D imaging. So it's basically, I guess it's called like 2D, 3D, or 2.5D. There's a catchy phrase for how these games look. You can Google it and look at it yourself. But one of the things that really struck me was I really am a fan of this style in terms of pixel art. It's not so. I'm not as big a fan of like retro games going all the way back to the 8-bit styles, so like Shovel Knight and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I appreciate it from a historical perspective, but I'd prefer a pixel art that kind of is in that 16 to 32-bit range. Yeah. I feel like it's more expressive. So I would say that what's cool about Octopath Traveler is that it mimics the JRPGs of yesteryear, especially to me, really evoked a vibe of like Final Fantasy VI. And that is one of those games that if you're an RPG fan, a JRPG fan, or a Final Fantasy fan, Final Fantasy VI is typically right there at the top for a lot of people. I'd say 4, 6, and 7 are kind of the ones that people go between when talking about the greatest ones of all time or their favorites.
I have seen a lot of groundswell lately for one of my favorites, which is 9. A lot of people saying 9, and I think that might just be when we were kind of growing up, people look back at 6 as the pinnacle of the SNES graphics and the storytelling and the music and everything. And then 9 is, I think, a lot of people that grew up and their PlayStation was their first console. Sure. They're looking back at 9 and saying like, wow.
Yeah, 9 is great too. I think, not to go on a deviation about Final Fantasy in particular, but 9 is one of those ones that I really like as well. But going back to Octopath Traveler, I have the first one on Switch. I never finished it. In fact, I got to a point where I was like, I kind of just put it down and I never really picked it back up. And then when the second one came out, it was like basically on all the systems. It's on PS5, which I own. And I noticed that basically a lot of quality of life things were upgraded. Like you could boost the battle speed ×2. The frame rate was better. There's just little things like that I think the older I get, the more I appreciate. But here's the rub about Octopath Traveler. So it's a weird name, right? But it's basically there's 8 different characters, hence the Octo part of this. And you can choose to play each character individually and just their story. Like you can pick a character and then you basically go through 5 chapters of that character's story. And then you, the player, can choose whether or not you just want to focus on finishing that character's story. Everything about that character is just about that character. Or you can go along and pick up the other characters, do their stories, and then, you can kind of pick and choose the people that you want to do it. You do have to kind of form a party at some point because characters get stronger, enemies get stronger. So one of the trade-offs with this is that the individual stories, and this is true about Octopath Traveler 2. I put like 85 hours into this. I put a lot of time into this. Wow. And I'll get into why. But but Octopath Traveler 2, one of the complaints about the first game was that there seemingly was no unified vision. So, or unification, meaning like these characters were just doing their own thing and would never really even acknowledge that the other person exists. So if I was like, hey, I'm Bob and I'm going on Bob's quest, but I'm going to bring, Sarah along, really the only interaction they had was like, hi, Sarah, my name's Bob. Do you want to follow me? Oh, sure. But then if I was on Bob's quest trail, Sarah was never a part of that. She's never included in Bob's quest in any way, except like a party member. Also, there's no like overarching theme of like, hey, we're actually going to be working towards this big giant, overcoming this one boss, much like you did in like Final Fantasy VI, where there was still the backdrop of the Empire and Kefka and all that stuff. And even though you had individual stories, they felt like they were a part of the same world. And Octopath Traveler is not so much like that. The second one does a better job of that, where you see more character interaction. And eventually when you do play through all of the characters' stories, there is kind of a little culmination at the end to fight a boss. But it's very like JRPG in the sense of like, this boss was not really like a character that was kind of there, present. It was just kind of like, if you remember, if you've ever played some Final Fantasy games, you'll be like, I beat the boss. And then all of a sudden there's like, no, here's the real boss. And it's some kind of esoteric, like monster that's been living in basically some type of demigod that's just like behind the scenes controlling everything, but there's no personal connection to it. It's just like, okay, well, this is the boss and we have to overcome evil through the power of friendship and that kind of thing. So I would say that, bringing it back to my experience, I really, really enjoyed Octopath Traveler. And one of the things I like about it is that it cuts through a lot of the fat. Like, it's not as explorative as a traditional Final Fantasy game was, but there's also things about it that I feel like maybe some of this I look back on with rose-colored glasses. And when I'm also playing Final Fantasy VI, the Pixel remake, I'm like, there's like the illusion of freedom in those games. There's the illusion of like exploration. And while Octopath Traveler doesn't have like an old school map where you're walking around, you kind of go from point to point. I don't really miss the overworld map like I thought I would. So it streamlines a lot of things. The combat is really good. And I actually found this to be like a game that I could just sit down and I could play for a couple hours and feel it was not a stressful game at all. It's challenging. And part of the reason why it took me 85 hours is because there's a ton of grinding, and you do have to grind to get to a level where you can actually beat the boss. But the game's graphics are beautiful. The music is really nice. It's really good. The voice acting is pretty good as well. But I still feel like if they come out with a third one, which I'm assuming they will, I would love to see something that's a bit more inclusive of the rest of the party. I would love to see if they could do everything that they did well and then make it feel like we're working towards like a big bad that you have a connection with, like a Kefka or a Sephiroth. So, I mean, if you're a fan of old school RPGs, I think it's worth it.
That's probably one I should look at getting for the wife, because she really enjoys playing RPGs, and I think she might get a kick out of the old school nature of that one.
Yeah, it's cool. It's not intimidating in terms of it's there's really not much to it in terms of like understanding how the mechanics work, but it's simple, but there's a lot of depth to it. So you do have to be strategic. You can't just go in there with the most powerful character and swing away. Like, you have to have certain party members. One of the big rubs is that like every enemy has a weakness. And so like, hey, this character is weak to fire. And so they'll have shield points. And when you hit them with a spell or an attack that hits their weakness, it'll subtract from their shield points until you break them. Once you break them, and think of it like a stagger meter, then you can actually do some real damage. So you have to have characters in there like a mage or somebody that can actually reduce those shield points. And that's really where a lot of that strategy comes in. It's really satisfying when you actually get all that put together.
That is, it does sound good. I actually have it on Steam. Like, my wife bought it for me. And
the first one?
Yes, the first one. And it says I've played it for 33 hours. I must have turned it on and then left it on all day, because I did not play any of it. Like, I might have started the story, but I didn't play like any of it. It feels more like a console one to me. It's interesting. You talk about 80 hours, and I was like, you know what? What are some of the games on here that I play that are RPGs on the computer here? What kind of hours do we have? That's going to be interesting to do them. So Persona 4 Golden, which I have not beaten yet, and it's my second playthrough because I also, if you remember, I borrowed your copy on the Vita
or the Vita,
yeah, for like a year and a half, and I did get pretty far, but I didn't beat it. So however many hours that was, plus 216 hours.
Oh my goodness!
And part of that is inflated because I probably had it on and then went to work or something and then came back or something.
Yeah.
But then this one, Persona 5, I've had 32 hours, and I'm through like the first castle on that. Like,
that game is so long.
Yeah,
it's gonna be over 100 hours easily.
Then Divinity Original Sin, 244 hours.
Holy crap.
And then Pathfinder Kingmaker, which I have not beaten, 89 hours. So some of these games are just absolutely massive. They're huge. There's so much content. And that's where it's kind of nice to have something that you can finish in a reasonable amount of time. Like over 80 hours, you know.
It's been a while since I've dumped that many hours into one game. It really has, and I've been slightly obsessed with it. But now I have other games I'm going to play. Like I bought the Resident Evil 4 remake, and I played like chapter 1 of that. I never beat the original, and I know it's a classic.
Oh, I beat it.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to that. But now we're hitting a period of time where like everything that I want to play is starting to come out. Final Fantasy 16's next month. Like once that's out, I'm not playing anything else. Street Fighter 6 is coming out. I'm excited about that. I do want to play Star Wars, the new Star Wars, but I know it's got some bugs, so I can kind of like wait on that. But yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, we're catching up on,
you know, that like, what are the games I want to play? Oh, the 16th entry in my favorite series, this Street Fighter 5 million. You know, it's like, it's the industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know this about Final Fantasy. Every story is different, so it doesn't feel like I'm playing Madden 2025 or whatever. But yeah. So let's get into the topic. So I did send you rather a couple things for us to talk about. So there's 3 topics that I have that I want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions in general. Konami's re-entry into gaming. That's kind of piggybacking off of one of the shows I did with my buddy John, talking about kind of Japan's kind of re-emergence in the gaming zeitgeist, I'll say. And then the topic I didn't send you, but I do want to touch on is just the game RedFall, and not just the game, but what I think the surrounding drama in terms of like what's come out of this game failing, and you being an Xbox owner, kind of getting your take on it. So out of those 3,
I like the way you put that, Xbox owner, because it's like, am I an Xbox fan? No,
you're not. And
I have games for it. And so if I want to play them.
So why don't we start with that? That's the most fresh one. So let's start with that one. So RedFall. Now, keep in mind, I'm getting a lot of this information probably the same way that anybody else is on here. You found it on, you're seeing articles. Maybe you listen to some podcasts. I listen to Sacred Symbols, which is Colin Moriarty's podcast. That's my main source of information when it comes to podcasts. But they also have an Xbox podcast in there, Defining Duke. And so those guys are part of that network, but they're focused on Xbox. So that being said, I really didn't know much about this game because I don't own an Xbox and I don't pay attention to games coming out for that. But apparently this game was super hyped, and it's coming out from, I think Arcane is the name of the studio. And they're the guys that did like, Deathloop and I should have had this pulled up. A couple other games that are really popular.
Wolfenstein, Youngblood, Dishonored, Death of the Outs.
Dishonored.
Dishonored sounds a big one.
They made their names on Dishonored, which was like, hey, this is a first-person shooter, but it's got all of this all this depth and all of these like different. It's kind of almost like a fast-paced Deus Ex.
Yeah, and those are that's one of those games where I wanted to play it, but it made me sick to play it.
Yeah,
and, I was so disappointed because it did look like a lot of fun. Dishonored.
Yeah, so Arcane comes out with this game. First, the game gets delayed a year, I think, and then it comes out that it's limited to 30 frames per second, which we can have a whole conversation about why that's important. But I think at this stage of gaming, having a limitation to 30 frames per second is not good, especially when you're talking about a game that's a first-person shooter, that having a higher frame rate, at least 60, or an option for that is key, because that affects, I think, the way the game moves, the way the game plays.
Right, that limits your competitive modes. It's not gonna, even if it was good, the competitive modes aren't going to take off because high-level players aren't going to play them.
Right. So as far as what I know about this game, it's kind of like Destiny, where there's like a single player experience, but you're in kind of a persistent world. So they delay this game, then it comes out 30 frames per second. It's about like killing vampires and things like that. First person shooter. And then this is a game. Now this is part of the debate, is that Xbox, or Microsoft rather, acquired Arcane. So this is one of their studios that they bought, which kind of goes
part of Bethesda.
Part of Bethesda, right? Bethesda with Skyrim and Fallout and upcoming Starfield. So we're in this thing, right, where Microsoft's buying these studios, which we'll talk about mergers and acquisitions in a minute. But this is one of their big gets. Like when they bought Bethesda, let's say, especially in the PS3, Xbox 360 era, they were massive. You think about Skyrim, you think about Fallout 3. Then you kind of had a generation where they didn't really put out anything. I mean, they had Fallout 4, which was like sort of, I think people liked it, but it wasn't the massive impact that I think people thought it was. And you had Fallout 76, which we talked about on this show several years ago, and the disaster that was.
Right.
But then you have Starfield, which everybody's looking forward to. And then you have this RedFall, which is different development studio, Arcane. But this game comes out and it absolutely, I mean, from everything I've read, this game's getting like 4s. And and it's not just that the game, people don't like the game. Like from what I can tell, the game is basically broken and not really in a state that's should be anywhere near to being playable. And this is a Game Pass game. So I think you can, if you have Game Pass, you can go out and get it. And it begs the question, again, maybe another topic about the validity of Game Pass and how does that affect, the quality of these games. But it comes out and it poops the bed. And this is starting to send ripples of real major concern through the Xbox community and people that are worried that, oh my gosh, how this would be like, hey, we've got this new God of War coming out and it plays like PS2 God of War or worse, because I argue that PS2 God of War is still playable. But like you have a studio that you bought that is now under this umbrella of like, hey, this is going to be one of our top tier games from one of our top tier studios that comes out and it's awful. And Xbox fans are super frustrated. And this has spawned a whole thing where the Xbox CEO, Phil Spencer, went on Kind of Funny's Xbox podcast and talked about how disappointed they were and started to say, well, we can't basically compete with PlayStation. And there's all these things that have come out from this. I don't know, Daniel, I've been talking a lot, but how much of this have you picked up on? And what is your just kind of initial take on that?
I don't, it's not a game for me. Wasn't following it. However, it has made enough of a negative impact on people who are talking about things like unfinished games. It's this thing we talked about it back in the day. It was before us. It will continue after us.
Sure.
It is a huge issue in the modern day. It was a huge issue when games were young. E.T., rushed, overprinted, contributed to the downfall of the Atari.
Right.
And there's a bunch of games on the NES that the angry video game nerd continues to make videos, right? Like he's got no shortage of videos to make about games that were not good. And nowadays I think there's a lot less because games take so much more money to make nowadays compared to what they used to. Doug Tenaple, who we interviewed on this show before, he recently said on Twitter, he was talking about video games, and he said what we used to do with a small team, like you need way more money, way more time to make an equivalent what is considered a triple A game or a big budget game today.
Yeah.
And the issue with Xbox is ultimately they had bad management after the original Xbox. The Xbox 360 had some exclusives from other companies, but other than that, they had Halo 3 and Halo Reach.
Yeah.
And there was no other first-party games. Yeah, Gears of War, but I never felt like Gears of War made a huge impact. So by the time they've gotten to now, they've had to go out and they've had to acquire studios to try to compete. Well, one of the things they've done really well is to acquire independent studios, smaller independent studios, Double Fine, Obsidian. They're putting out games that are getting really great reviews. So Obsidian has put out Outer Worlds, which they were in production on before, but now they've put out Pentiment and Grounded as well. And both of those games have done really well for them. They've gotten great reviews. People have enjoyed them, but they're not necessarily that, we'll call it AAA game that people are looking for, that the mainstream normie kind of person is looking for. They're not going to play. They might have played Fallout New Vegas if they were like normie adjacent, but like they're not going to go out and play Tyranny or Pillars of Eternity or some game like that is a PC style game that might be on a console, but it's really made for the PC.
Right.
And so a lot of what Microsoft is doing is it almost feels like it's for the PC, and then the Xbox is almost an afterthought, or it's for the niche fan or the I don't know, I want to say hardcore gamer, because it means so many things, but a specific type of gamer, more geared toward me, honestly. And then when they acquired Bethesda, I don't know what we said back then, if it happened before or after we did the podcast, but
I think it happened after.
Yeah, I think my opinion of it probably at the time would have been that what has Bethesda done for me lately?
Right.
They were not in a good position in terms of a company when they got acquired. This is a game that was in production before then, that they're probably looking at, we've got to get something out from this. We've got to make some money off of this. And they want to release it. Fortunately, they released it in a pretty bad state. And that's what is angering people that pay full price for a game. And this is the danger, is like, there's always been pre-orders. Oh, don't pre-order a game. Don't pre-order a game. But then pre-orders are super important to the health of a company at that level, because they need to have those pre-orders to determine, hey, do we push forward on some other project? Do we cancel this now a year out and cut our losses, or do we keep pushing forward with something?
Yeah.
And there's just so many aspects of this, and it's interesting to see, for sure.
Yeah, you're hitting. I think it's one thing for Xbox to have a bad game. Like, everybody has bad games, right? Like, and I think the narrative around this, what makes this interesting to me, is how this ties into, two areas. Is that the mergers and acquisitions, there's a whole big story back and forth about Microsoft trying to acquire Activision, which would effectively give them control over Call of Duty and all the Blizzard and all the other things. So that's been a story, and there's sites that can cover this in way more detail. The long short of it is that they got blocked by some European commission due to some cloud gaming thing, which to me is like, hey, that's like,
if they get that resolved, that'll go through.
What's that?
So like, once they find some way around it, that's all they're looking for, basically, is
that's a whole story in of itself, which I'm not prepared to go over. But the idea of mergers and acquisitions is just an interesting one, because, to your point, like, Microsoft is basically, I'm going to read something. I'm actually going to read a few things. Now I'm pulling some quotes from what I mentioned earlier, Phil Spencer's interview on the Kind of Funny X podcast, episode 137, if you're interested. But here's part of this. He says, I see commentary that if you just build great games, everything would turn around. It's just not true that if we go off and build great games, all of a sudden you're going to see the console shares shift in a dramatic way. We lost the worst generation to lose in the Xbox One generation, where everybody built their digital library of games. So when you go back and you're building on Xbox, we want to build an Xbox community to feel awesome. But this idea that if we're just focused on great games on our console, that we're somehow going to win the console race, I don't think that really, I think doesn't really lay to the reality of most people. I have
a realistic point of view, man.
Yeah, but I have issues with what he said. I think the way this ties in together for me, right? Like, it's obvious for anybody who knows me or listen to this. I'm a PlayStation gamer first. I also own a Switch, and then I have a PC that I'm using now that can basically run any game that comes out on Xbox. You know, unless it's like at the highest 4K ray tracing, I can't do that. But I can play pretty much everything else. I would love a reason to own an Xbox because I love video games. And I'm old enough now to where I don't care. This isn't fanboying for me. This isn't me like, oh, I ride or die with PlayStation. I already went through that with the PS3 in the early days. So, but this is like a thing where it's like, Xbox, give me a good reason. Yeah. Give me a good reason to buy this. And it just, to me, feels like they're not trying. I would say Nintendo's not trying to compete with PlayStation in that same level either, but they've carved out enough of a niche for themselves where it doesn't really matter what PlayStation's doing. Nintendo's going to always be successful because they've got the brand recognition. Like, Xbox does not have that. The closest thing that they have is Halo, and Halo Infinite was another troubled game that when they showed that, people were like, what is this? This doesn't look like a next gen game. It has all these issues. It's became a meme like right away. They delayed it, and now it's like okay from what I understand, but it still was missing a lot of features. It was just very half baked. And this kind of goes into this idea that if I'm an Xbox fan, I'm worried about these mergers. Like, you're going to buy Call of Duty, or you're going to buy Activision, and then these franchises are just going to get pushed out onto Game Pass. So we can get this on Game Pass as soon as possible, so people sign up for Game Pass. They're going to come out half baked. And I would argue that against what he said. Like, if your big games are not good, you don't have nothing that can compete with any of Sony's or Nintendo's top brands, any of them. Like,
I think one thing that just like, I've never played more than probably an hour of an Arcane Studios game with the first Dishonored, but looking at their other titles that they've done, they developed Prey, which that's a sequel, right? Like that or a remake or something like that.
I think it is. I think they got the IP and then did their own version of it.
Right. So that's one that they developed. But then, other than Dishonored, they started co-developing with other companies like the Wolfenstein games, and it's not like they had big hits. And I think one of the things is people want there to be these giant hits. They want there to be this Halo, and the odds of it happening are so slim. But then when you look over at PlayStation, you see what the Ghosts of
Tsushima.
Yeah, Ghost of Tsushima. You see things like all the first party games on there that are coming out, and they're doing really good things. Spider-Man was a big deal for them. They're continuing to put out these good games because they have this great infrastructure in place, and Xbox let their infrastructure fail. They had bad leadership that put time and effort into stupid things, into chasing Nintendo with motion controls and things like that. You know, you have Rare. Rare hasn't put out a great game since the Super Nintendo. They haven't put out a good game since, I mean, who knows when. Like, you could be talking the original Xbox, maybe the Xbox 360 if you like cameo elements of power or whatever it was. Have you even heard of that game?
No.
Nobody has. They did not have the infrastructure. They've had to try to get it by buying things. And Bethesda had some big franchises, and I'm sure that they are going to be trying to put their full effort into a Elder Scrolls game, into the real big Bethesda games. But I think people want to see huge games come out from developers, and they want to see and have that next killer app. And just looking at this game, I don't see it. Like, it does not scream to me killer app. Like, killing vampires and stuff. Like, nothing about it. It just seems like a indie budgeted game. And I think putting that kind of pressure onto it because it's the first big release from their acquisition is a problem. But when you look at what they've allowed Obsidian to do, and Exile really hasn't put anything out yet. That's another one of the companies they bought that puts out Wasteland, that series. We'll see what they end up putting out. But Double Fine, letting these companies kind of do their own thing, giving them the freedom of, yes, you are part of Microsoft. You have these budgets in place. You have the time to do it. And kind of restructuring, I think they could get to a point where people are like, you've got to play that new Elder Scrolls. Like, you thought Skyrim was good. This is another level. That kind of a thing that could happen. And he is right. They really messed up with the Xbox One. I remember saying early on in the Xbox's life, there's no first party games. There's no exclusive games to this that make it worth owning. Yeah. And there was a bunch of fanboys that they loved Xbox, they loved Microsoft, and they were trying to argue with me, and that's not true. And so I went and I got the list, and I did. This is how I am. I'm going to prove someone wrong, even if it's in my own mind and they never even see it. I've got to know that I was right. I said, like,
you're having that argument in the shower.
Right. So I went and looked up, and I found the stats. I counted how many PlayStation exclusives had come out that were full games, not just little releases on like the PS 3 store or whatever, PS4 store. And I compared them, and this was early on, and it was triple the amount of games from Sony, first party exclusive games. And that was huge for me. It was like, hey, Xbox can get there, they can come back, but they never did. There is not one exclusive for the Xbox that I have that I play regularly.
Yeah.
And the only games I played on Xbox One were games that didn't come out on PC right away that I wanted to kind of play. Like, I think Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't come out on PC right away. So I got that on Xbox. It's like there was no exclusives that I've got to play this. There was nothing. And they really did shoot themselves in the foot on that. And they're trying to play catch up. And then it doesn't help when people are hyping games that honestly look like a B tier game to me from looking at what kind of a game it is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in there you said that I agree with that. I think most of it is honestly just incontrovertible. Like, you can't argue against it. I think here, for me, there's a couple things. Like, to me, Xbox just doesn't have an identity. They just don't, in my opinion. Like, I feel like Halo was their strongest chance to have an identity. They're online, like Xbox 360 blew PS3 out of the water for like the first 3-4 years because it came out first a year ahead of time. It had great online integration.
Yeah, Oblivion was what, a year in or something. Like, there was a huge jump.
It was cheaper than the PS3 by far. They did a lot of things right, but you're right that once kind of Sony got, and Sony eventually sales wise caught up to them. But what Sony did and what I think was smart, and this kind of gets into a bit of future projection and where like these consoles are going to end up going, are these companies, but having that kind of competition, and Sony, which the PS2 is, I still think, the greatest selling console of all time, coming off of that, and then basically, tripping at the start, they made a lot of big promises with, and I was an early adopter. I spent $600 on that, which by today's inflation probably would have been $1,200.
Yeah.
But so I spent a lot of money on this thing for a system that wasn't as good as the Xbox, or not good enough. So I say all this to say Xbox really, they came out of the gate charging. You're right, the Xbox One was
the naming conventions were so
I know,
stupid.
and
such bad leadership.
Yeah, it's just like whoever that dude was like, he became a meme.
Don Matrick or something. Oh,
yeah. They completely misjudged the direction, but and then they didn't double down on it. They tried to go backwards. So, but here's the real thing. And when I see this, for me, really kind of like when I saw Halo Infinite, and I was like, they're gonna have Halo Infinite on next gen hardware. Dude, like when I see like a Naughty Dog game, or I see a game from Guerrilla, or I see a game from Sony Santa Monica, I see The Last of Us, I see Uncharted, I see God of War, I see Horizon. These games just look amazing, and they look really top tier. They look like some money was put behind it. I don't know why and how Xbox lets Halo go out and be previewed and look like trash. And like, this is, if anything, you got to have Halo being Halo, at least Halo has to be a AAA game that looks different, or at least it looks like you dumped some money into this. I don't know what's going on. 343 Studios, I don't know if they're even doing this anymore, but it feels like every time they have something that's like, hey, this is going to be our thing. This is going to be the thing that tries to have an identity and tries to be like, hey, when I think of Xbox, I think of Halo. And I think of like, wow, the next Halo game is like, I'm absolutely going to buy that because I know that it's going to be freaking awesome. Nintendo doesn't have the graphical power at all, but they always, like, they're what's that?
Very rare for them to put out a game that's
like Tears of the Kingdom just came out, and it's like it's still running on the Switch. And I mean, that game's going to sell like gangbusters. It's getting like, where are the 9s and 10s from any of these first party games? So now the worry is Xbox is buying these studios and they're crapping out games. They're crapping these games out that are not. I mean, these are not even like AA level games. Like in the case of Redfall, this game it's probably going to be a bargain bin game.
Well, and so I totally get that, and it's easy to think like, man, they've screwed this up. This is terrible. But that's why I keep pointing back to those other studios that they've given time. The Bethesda acquisition is relatively recent. This is a game that was in development probably before Microsoft bought it. And it's not to say they shouldn't have put out a good game. They should have. Every game should be good, right? But my only thing to people saying that kind of stuff is caution. Just caution. Because yes, is that company didn't have a huge track record. It's not Obsidian. It's not people that left Black Isle Games that made all these games back in the day that everyone loved, and they were, they were at Interplay in the Black Isle. They went to Obsidian and they made games that everyone loved, like for 2 or 3 generations now. Like, they've made a few games, and it's people are often surface level. A game came out, maybe they had Game Pass and they tried it out. Like, this is garbage, and they didn't like it. Before, it wouldn't have mattered, but because Bethesda got bought by Microsoft and they're worried about the future of the franchises they like that Bethesda has, they are, there's a place for concern. But my thing is, like, I've just seen the track record of the studios that they have acquired that have been allowed to make games, and they've done a good job. It's the studio. It's can they get the right people in place? And it doesn't matter to me because it's still going to be a PC game and I'm not playing these games. But
well, you hit it right on the head. I mean, that's why I don't do it, is because I've got a computer that can play all these games. Like, okay, so when Starfield comes out, if Starfield is 30 frames per second on Xbox which is also a big rumor. and then or there's a 60 frame per second on PC, I'm buying it on PC. Like there's nothing that draws me to wanting to play this on the Xbox.
And that's because we have the luxury of having a PC, whereas a lot of people, they don't have. PC is not as widely adopted.
So here's to this point, Xbox is becoming the best bargain.
Yes.
This is something that, like, hey, you have kids, you don't want to spend a lot of money, you don't want to buy a PC, you want to make things easier. Xbox, that's where Xbox is going to find its niche, if at all. And I mean, maybe that'll work for them, maybe it won't. And if that's the route they're going, then they probably should just double down on that. But I think what's hard is that, and I consider myself, I wouldn't consider a hardcore gamer probably plays a lot more games than I do, but I'm
enthusiastic gamer.
I'm an enthusiast. Thank you. That's a good
enthusiast.
Yeah. And I pay attention to the industry, and I pay attention to what's going on, and I buy games and play them as I can. But it's not a good look within the industry, and Xbox needs some kind of a win, I think. I mean, they're backed by Microsoft. They're going to be around for a while, and I think. Coming back to the Sony side of things, Sony, in my opinion, needs a strong Xbox. Like, gaming needs a strong Xbox because that's what breeds competition and creativity. And in my opinion, so many of the things that we define Sony by now happened in that PS3 era, where Sony had to be forced to do things internally because the PS2 was kind of a catch-all system. PS1 was kind of like the same thing. Like, well, you had like Crash Bandicoot, and then PS2. I can't think of anything like that was like, this is what defines PS2 in a first party. They just had games. They had everything on there. Yeah. so PS3 was when it was like, oh, now Naughty Dog, people know what that is. Oh, now people know what these other studios are, and they were forced to think
about. Sorry, interesting to think about the early days of PlayStation 3. The games were forgettable.
Oh,
there was some flying game that they made. There was like a shooter that is totally forgotten. Like, I'm not even remembering these things' names. I can picture them almost in my head. And like the biggest thing they had early on was like Little Big Planet. So like, it's not, if a company is allowed to give the time. Hi, buddy. Thank you. If they're allowed to give the time, then we could see it happen.
We're gonna see, man. I mean, I think they have the developer of what, it's not Heavenly Sword, but it's that game that was from Ninja Theory, that Hellblade.
Yeah, Hellblade. Yeah, which is a really fun game, and to see what these companies can do if they're given the time, they're given the money, and they're given the freedom to kind of do it. I still think they can, and a great fully supported micro game from Ninja Theory could be really, really amazing, and I'm still looking forward to it.
Me too. I agree. I think these companies are capable of it. And I think there's just a lot of things. There's like, when I think about getting back to the mergers and acquisitions, what concerns me about that is there's multiple things that concern me about that. I don't like the practice of that in general. But if Microsoft, out of all companies, buys up this, like, are they going to just try to shove them into Game Pass as soon as possible? And are we going to get more half-baked games? And like, I don't know if I've seen any of these acquisitions where Microsoft bought them and the games were better. It's just like they feel like once they're under Microsoft, they go there to die.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the problem is when it goes to Double Fine and Obsidian. I keep pointing to those. It's the last time I'll say it, but though they have put out great games that have gotten great reviews since being purchased, and I think it has to do with with the identity of the company when it was acquired, the people who were there, the type of games they were making, but they're not games that the mainstream got mainstream attention. Konami. I want to talk about Konami.
Yeah, can we shelve Konami?
No. All right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've already gone over an hour, so I think, yeah. Well, Konami, I think we could talk about Konami.
Save it. I have so much to say about
I do want to save it because I want to save this.
A little preview though. You mentioned Resident Evil remake on 4. I don't care about remakes. I don't care about remakes.
I do. If it's well done, I'm all in. 100%. Especially with these games that came out in the PS2, some PS1 eras.
That game still looks decent. Like that's my thing.
Dude, you can't move and shoot. That I would, if I tried to go back and play Resident Evil 4, which I've tried, I cannot get over the fact that you have to stand still and aim around. I hate that.
That adds to the horror element. And like, see that the problem I think with gaming versus movies or books and television, comic books and things is that games are so wedded to what the technology was at the time. There'll be things today, conventions that feel off when we get into the future. It'll just happen as things change, as games change. But one of the things that has changed about Resident Evil since 4, especially since 4, but even from 1 to 4, is the style of game where it's become, if you make it more like a regular shooter, it becomes less like a Resident Evil game. It becomes less horrific. It becomes more of an action game, and it doesn't feel the same. And those kinds of changes, I think, matter. It's like, not to get on the Konami, I'm not trying to, but Castlevania, right? They made Castlevania Symphony of the Night. They never made another console game like that. That was it. They got to the pinnacle and they're like, we're never going to make another one of those. I know everyone loved that game. Everyone still loves it. Guess what? We're never going to make another one like it. And that's what it feels like with Resident Evil 4, as you get to 5 and 6 and you're like, okay.
You're touching on some things I do want to talk about, but I do want to save it because I think it's going to be good to talk about Konami.
Right.
And I do. And we didn't talk about this. We did talk about the rise of Japan gaming, but I want to contrast. Maybe this will be the main topic, contrasting Konami and Capcom and what those two kind of like old school, original Japanese companies, the paths that they've taken and where they're going to intersect here. So that's a little teaser for you guys. Yeah, this was fun, dude. It was good, man. I was getting hyped up about this stuff.
It was nice. I think we had a good show here. We're getting back into the groove of it. We're going old school with our time, doing it on Saturday mornings, and it's
actually helpful. I enjoy the mornings better. Like at nighttime, I'm kind of just like,
it's like
with my wife.
Yeah, and it does. It feels like, okay, I like this.
Yeah.
If I can say one more thing before I go, comic book that I have worked on is currently available on Indiegogo. It's been fully funded on Kickstarter, meaning if you back it on Indiegogo right now, you're definitely getting the book. And there's all kinds of tiers. There's a lower tier that's just a comic where I did the letters for part of it. And then there's up to a deluxe edition, which has a bunch of bonus content, including a backup comic drawn by me. So if you guys are interested, Lone Wolf 2 on Indiegogo, and Lone Wolf 1 is available as well. So
sweet. Yeah, thanks for the plug. We're looking at bringing more content, and at least this podcast we're shooting for once a week, and see if we can keep this going. And then Daniel and I are brainstorming behind the scenes about what this will look like, and we're open to suggestions. If anybody cares, definitely write in, and hopefully we'll just keep this going. I'm looking forward to the Konami conversation. So let's do it same time next week. So as always, Daniel,
play the games the way you want to play them.
And that's going to be our tagline. Peace out, guys.
Adios.